Good evening. Welcome to our first innovation forum for the season with the MIT Enterprise Forum Northwest. And our program tonight is Augmented Humans. The MIT Enterprise Forum is a global organization of dedicated professionals with 25 local chapters affiliated with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology through MIT Technology Review. We inform, connect, and coach technology entrepreneurs, enabling them to rapidly transform ideas into world-changing companies. We are a volunteer-run organization of people who seek to be inspired and educated through technology leadership. Please also join us for our programs later this year: Smart Homes, Molecular Machining, Connected Cities, and 3D Bioprinting. I'm Paul Meehan, and this program would not have been possible without the dedication of the following volunteers: David Anderson, who headed the team, Shirley Lunn, Vicki Owens, Mark Anderson, Gary Spanner, Jimmy Gia, who's back at the mothership this week, Roy Racera, Timothy Mack, and Adam Schuster. These programs are made possible by our sponsors. For the season, we have T-Mobile and Artifact Group. For the STEM program, which we just started this year, T-Mobile sponsoring it. In-kind sponsorships are from Freelock Computing, Pinchot University, NetReflector, the MIT Club of Puget Sound, and Puget Sound Video. And thanks to our program captain, Stokes Lawrence, in supporting the chapter by purchasing a block of tickets for each of our events. In addition, please see one of us, such as myself, if you are interested in becoming a program captain yourself, or contact the program. Our moderator tonight is the internationally recognized science fiction writer, Greg Bear. His work has covered themes of galactic conflict, artificial universes, consciousness and cultural practices, and accelerated evolution. His most recent work is the Forerunner trilogy, written in the Halo universe. And most notably, Greg Bear was one of the 5 co-founders of the San Diego Comic-Con. So Greg, if you could stand up and take a bow. Our presenters tonight are Russ Angold from Exobionics. He has a fascinating story of how he got into his interest with exoskeletons and how he applies them in today's world. His interest is in general augmentation of the human body. Our first presenter is Dr. Thomas Duell, who got his MD from a combined MIT-Harvard program and then a PhD from Harvard. He's a practicing neurologist at Swedish. He's faculty at the UW in digital experimental arts, and he invented the encephalophone. Did I say that even closely correctly? Encephalophone. Okay, there we go. So without further ado, I believe, Thomas, the stage is yours. Oh, Greg, did you want? Okay.
So it's my privilege to be here tonight, and actually as a living cyborg, I'm kind of in between these gentlemen, because 2 years ago at Swedish, where Tom works, I had a heart valve implant and also a new aorta put in, and that's a process in which I was not conscious for the time, but when I woke up, I was glad to be alive. So I am literally an augmented human being. And what we're talking about tonight is the interface between what it is to be human and how you make that stronger, better, faster. I think that Russ is actually working on the kind of suit that will allow Ripley to take out the mother alien, right? But augmentation and man-amplified suits and all of these different variations are common themes in science fiction and great stuff. I will give a warning, though, that if this augmentation and enhancement allows you to control your environment completely with thought processes, you might end up like Forbidden Planet. You remember what the Krell had a problem with? They created an artificial system to transmit matter anywhere on demand, but they were upper brain thinkers and they didn't worry about the id. So on the first day they put the system online, the id came out and they had all these monsters destroy them, tear them limb from limb. We never know what they really look like. That was also in City in the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. So science fiction is kind of prophetic and also warning about, be careful what you wish for. In this case, though, the practicalities of these things are pretty astonishing because you allow people who are ill or who have had physical disabilities or have had injuries to recover a lot of what they've done. But imagine an injury you don't know you have. What if you have no real musical ability? Well, Tom can perhaps restore that ability or give it to you to begin with, because he's working on creating a way for the brain to interact with electric sound to create music by itself. That's pretty sublime. And I think in terms of science fiction, in terms of the future, in terms of all the things that we want to be in the world, I'd like to be musical. So if you can get me a Nobel Prize for lyrics and music, I'll be very happy down the road. But literally, we're now leaning into, as a kid, I loved electronic music. It wasn't very popular back in the 1970s, but I still love it, and it's now extremely popular. And so what we have is, if you have the ability to create a new musical instrument like the encephalophone, or the electroencephalophone, I think encephalophone is a little easier to say, then you can actually really get some cool stuff down. And if you can put a cap on and make sounds through your home computer or through your television or through your iPhone or whatever. The one thing I do warn about in all of these things is everything that has a one-way connection can have a two-way connection. So as you're making music with your head, is your iPhone recording your patterns and sending them off to Apple or to Google or to wherever, so they have mental patterns as to what you're doing when you're doing something and thinking about buying something or going somewhere. When you sign on for Google now, your phone will give traffic information online. You have to sign that contract, otherwise they don't give it to you. And so the traffic information goes out. What if that's true of your brain traffic? What if everywhere you go, your instrumentations are capable of doing that two-way, so you know more about yourself or someone knows more about you? Now imagine a WikiLeaks downloading your brain patterns and putting them up for all to see with general comparisons of what these might mean, if you're interpreting them through artistic means or political means or whatever. Right? Could be very interesting. We are on the cutting edge now of doing what science fiction has been talking about for a very long time. The Terminal Man, Michael Crichton's book, is kind of dealing with what these gentlemen are doing at this point, downloading brain signals to change the environment around an individual. But medically speaking, this is extraordinary material, because you can give people full function with the kind of materials that we were discussing with other people here just a few hours ago, and thinking of the kind of materials technology that we've got. You can recreate limbs. You can give the person control of those limbs. You can basically do what happened with me and my aorta for the entire body. And that brings up the notion of, then, what is it to be human? Now, mind you, I am an artificial being, but I do not have a nuclear-powered heart, nor am I Iron Man. And so, with great power usually comes supervillains, which is a real problem. I don't want to face those supervillains, but what are the upsides and downsides in human interface technology, enhanced interface technology, enhanced and augmented human abilities, and enhanced and augmented machine abilities? Now, we've seen a lot of films recently where drone pilots are flying drones and fighter pilots are doing this. Well, Tom Furness at the Human Interface Technologies Laboratory at UW was working with how to get information to pilots quicker. But if the pilots have the information, then the interface allows a better connection to the airplane, which is actually talked about in a novel by Joe Poyer way back in the 1960s called North Cape, where you had a fighter pilot flying over polar regions, running spy missions, and he was, on drugs. He was hallucinogenically connected to his jet through electroencephalic coding, and that jet was part of him, and he thought he was the jet as he flew. Well, the problem, of course, is that he crashes, and then what are you when you crash and you don't have the jet anymore that you're a part of? So all of these ideas really lead us into future scenarios, which will be where we work in the future. There are so many possibilities as to new industries, new medical applications, new personal applications. But I want to warn you, I had no idea that I was going to lose my aorta. What happens as you're developing this stuff, that you become part of the equation, you become part of the experiment, and you are still kept alive and still kept capable because of what these gentlemen are doing? I think that is something really worth hearing more about. So I'd like to begin by bringing up Tom, who did work at the Swedish Cherry Hill surgical clinic doing neurology, and I probably could have used his help then, but Tom, come on up and let us go.
Thanks a lot for that introduction, and thanks to the MIT Enterprise Forum for having me speak. I'm going to speak to you about brain-computer interfaces and brain-music interfaces, kind of going from experimental art to neurological therapy. So you heard a little bit about my background. I'm going to give you a little bit more about my background with a lot of logos. It's always good to have a lot of logos on there and give credit to different places. My MIT connection was from my medical school training. I was in the Harvard MIT Division of Health Sciences and Technology. And for those of you in the know, that's building E25. So that's back near Kendall Square. I got a PhD in neuroscience from the Harvard program in neuroscience. And I worked on genetics of brain development and neurophysiology of brain development. While I was in graduate school, I also did continued my music studies at New England Conservatory, where I was working towards a certificate in jazz in music theory and composition. I then had to completely stop my music studies while I did a neurology residency, which was all absorbing at Mass General and Brigham Women's Hospital, and then I did further postgraduate training, subspecialty and fellowships in neurophysiology, clinical neurophysiology, which is mostly EEG and epilepsy. First at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, and then came to Seattle about 6 years ago, where I was doing surgical epilepsy at UW Harborview. So currently, I'm a neurologist at Swedish Hospital, Swedish Neuroscience Institute, and I do inpatient neurology, so mostly acute stroke, although we treat patients with brain tumors, seizures, MS, anything that you would have to come in to the hospital for. So if you have to see me, it's generally not good. I also do read EEGs for the hospital, so that's kind of a vacation day where I can sit back and drink coffee and just read EEGs without anyone dying in front of me. I also teach at the University of Washington, so I'm in the Center for Digital Arts and Experimental Media, where I teach a class called Art and Brain. It's the neuroscience of art and the art of neuroscience, and I do some research on music cognition. And then I have a sort of hybrid laboratory art studio where I developed the encephalophone, which is my brain music device. And I have some grants I should acknowledge from For Culture, King County, and from 92, which is a art and technology festival that's coming up in Seattle. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is a little bit of the basics of EEG, electrophysiology, neurophysiology, just sort of the basics of how we measure brain waves or the electrical activity of the brain. I'll talk to you a little bit about how people have taken EEG and turned it into sound and into music, and then I'll talk a bit about brain-computer interfaces, taking that brain signal and using it to bypass the peripheral nerves and muscle to help people with, mainly to help people with motor disability or other disabilities. And then I'll describe a bit about my device, the brain music interface I call the encephalophone. And I'll have a video that'll show quite nicely a demonstration of using the device with a patient, a very special and unique patient, and also a little bit of the performance aspect of it. So EEG, or electroencephalogram, it's basically a brain imaging modality that looks at the electrical activity of the brain, of brain structures. So you have metal electrodes, and then you have conductive media, mostly gel, that's put on the scalp. I'm talking here about surface EEG. There's also intracranial EEG, where you can put electrodes directly in the brain if you cut open the skull. But I'm going to talk mostly about surface EEG here. We use it mostly, it was developed mostly to diagnose epilepsy, so to look for seizures or evidence of seizures. Also used to study sleep disorders, and it's used for research in those areas as well, in epilepsy and sleep disorders, but more and more it's been, as we've learned more about the signal, it's been used for cognitive neuroscience research. The advantage of it over other imaging modalities is it's extremely precise temporally, so the temporal resolution is milliseconds. You can almost instantly see changes happening, which is not true of a lot of other imaging modalities. And it's non-invasive. You put electrodes on and some gel, and there might be a little irritation, but essentially we're not generally, although we do this occasionally, but the vast majority of the time we're not delivering electricity. It's something to understand. You're just listening. So it's really non-invasive. But there are disadvantages, and that includes that its spatial resolution is not very good. You can only kind of tell general regions of the brain within a few centimeters. It's not very precise. Particularly deep parts of the brain are not easy to hear at the surface. And then the signal itself is very quiet. So if you think of it in terms of sound, you're listening to a very quiet signal around with a lot of noise. So that noise comes from non-brain structures. It can come from the muscle, from other electrical devices in the room. It can come from movement. You're listening at microvolt levels, and there are larger millivolt and volt level signals that you have to get through. So it's lots of artifact and lots of noise to get through. So what is that noise? Well, some of it is you can just have poor conductance. There has to be the electricity has to be conducted very well from the scalp all the way to the electrode without any air or other interference. There's electrical line noise everywhere we go. There's 60 hertz electrical noise that you have to take care of. Cell phones can generate artifact near EEG. Again, we're very sensitive electrodes. Eye movement, so your eyeball, your orbit has a dipole, so the cornea up here is positive and your retina is negative, and it's actually a pretty big dipole. And if you close your eyes, there's something called the Bell's phenomenon. Your eyes go up. You may not believe it, but every time you blink, your eyes go up like this. Or if you close your eyes, you go to sleep. And when the eyes go up, that dipole goes up, so you get positive moving upward. You can see off on the left there those big, maybe we can get a cursor on here. Yeah, these big excursions here, those huge things, that's not brain, those are eye. That's the eye moving up, that's that dipole. So that's a big source of artifact. Muscle, so up here on the right, you can see all this sort of dense red. That's all muscle. It's high frequency. It's millivolt level, so it's much louder than the microvolt level of true brain signal. And then movement. If you just move around, the electrodes have a movement artifact. This up here on the right, this is just an EEG, and each one of these traces going across is a different electrode. It's actually a different pair of electrodes, but this is all brain signal here. Those are real, actual rhythms of the brain, and then this is all this up here. That's all muscle. That's a big eye, and that's some other movement. So you can kind of get a sense of how much we need to listen I'd think of it as like a cocktail party, and there's a person you want to hear, and they're a very quiet speaker, and there's a bunch of loud people in the room. You have to get really close to them, try to make everyone else quiet, maybe even move to another room to hear them. This is what you have to get through. So it's a difficult, complicated, messy signal, which is why we don't just have people walking around with EEGs just controlling things all the time. Precisely, it's a difficult thing to work with. We divide up the brain waves, they're regular oscillatory patterns that we see of true brain signal. We divide them up somewhat arbitrarily into these different frequency ranges. So in the bottom we have delta, which is the slowest, theta, alpha, and beta. They're roughly organized into physiological organizations, but we're just sort of making arbitrary cutoffs. But those are the kind of regular patterns we see. This is a normal EEG, and again, going from left to right is time, and it's about 10 seconds or 12 seconds across, and each one of these squiggly lines is a different electrode pair, so different regions of the brain. And on the left, you have someone who has their eyes open, and then you see those red arrows right when they close their eyes. You can see that big eye artifact. And then you see a very regular oscillatory rhythm there. It's particularly in the back of the brain, in the O, the occipital back here. That's something called the posterior dominant rhythm. So it's a rhythm that we see in the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, and that is the primary visual cortex. So it's a part that's processing vision. And you'll notice when your eyes close, it goes on. It's kind of a way to think of it as a sort of a holding pattern for the visual cortex. So when you're not doing anything, you're awake, but your eyes are closed and you're not getting any input from vision, that part of the brain is kind of ready and resting. This sort of holding pattern is going on. So that's called the posterior dominant rhythm. Pay attention, this will come up in the quiz later on. Another similar type of rhythm is called the mu rhythm. So they confusingly keep using Greek letter names. Mu rhythm is actually an alpha frequency rhythm. It's called mu because of its shape, but it's the equivalent. So in the motor cortex helps control movement. You also have a resting rhythm called the mu rhythm. So when you're resting, you're awake, you're alert, but you're not moving, that mu rhythm is present. It goes away when you start using the motor cortex. So if I start moving my right arm, my left motor cortex will have a mu rhythm, and then when I start moving, the mu rhythm goes away. Because that resting pattern's over. It's not resting anymore, it's activating other patterns. We can't really measure at the surface very well the active use of the motor cortex. You can do that with intracranial electrodes, but in the surface, we can pretty much measure the resting pattern and then not resting pattern. So the mu rhythm goes away. Down there at the bottom, you can see where it says alpha, this is the strongest signal here when you're not doing anything is quite high. It's around 10 hertz. And then what's neat is if I start moving that right arm, the mu goes away, that resting rhythm goes away. But also if you imagine moving the right arm, it goes away. So just imagining engages a lot of the same circuits that actually moving the arm does. So you'll see that the alpha goes down. There's also beta and gamma, higher frequency stuff that goes down, but we're focusing on the alpha mainly because it's such a large and easily measurable signal. This is important, also will be on the quiz later, because this is a rhythm, if you think about it, that's very useful for a brain-computer interface. The reason being, it's a signal that we can turn on and turn off by thinking about movement, or not thinking about movement, without actually moving. So what we're looking for signals for brain-computer interfaces are signals that we can measure, we know what they do, and they're controllable without movement. Because if someone is paralyzed from a stroke or from ALS, they won't be able to move, but they may be able to still think about movement. So that's a signal that can be quite useful. People have thought about sonifying EEG from the very beginning. So the first description of EEG was by this guy, Hans Berger, and this is the only picture I have of him, and after a couple of years, I looked and I noticed this strange little piece of brain here. And it's a little disturbing because I'm quite sure it's human, and I'm also quite sure that it's not a complete brain. So I don't know what it's doing there. It's very disturbing. But he had the first description of EEG, and he described this posterior dominant rhythm. You remember the one in the back of the brain that it's a resting rhythm for the visual cortex. These guys in 1934 decided, Adrian and Matthews, they wanted to replicate his results, make sure that they were real, and they replicated them, and they decided to monitor their own EEG with sound. So very early on, people saw these rhythms, and they somehow thought, oh, this sort of would make sense if we listened to it, not just look at it. And people have gone on to create artwork and music and other sonifications of EEG. This is from 1965, the composer Alvin Lucier created a piece called Music for Solo Performer, where he used EEG to control the volume of percussion instruments by opening and closing his eyes. So he's using that posterior dominant rhythm to turn on and off actuators of speakers on a timpani and a snare drum. And there's lots of technical reasons why it wasn't the world's best from a scientific point of view, but artistically quite interesting. He worked with John Cage, and apparently when they were doing this is actually a 1976 redux of the original 1965. They were having lots of trouble with getting good signal to noise, so apparently John Cage was back behind the curtains, kind of adjusting things manually by what he thought was stronger or quieter signal. And of course, the presentation and the preparation with the EEG is all part of the performance. I'm having trouble fast forwarding because this would be a very long, boring beginning. Maybe I've got an idea of how I could do this. Let's see. A little farther along here. So here he is controlling drums. You can see the timpani there. Any sense? I think you get the picture. So others in the 70s, artist David Rosenboom created a few pieces using EEG. This one's a little cryptic. All we have is a schematic there, and he said there were 10 participants and they were controlling mixing of music that were played by keyboard performers live, along with some electronic phosphine stimulators, whatever that is. We don't have any video or audio of that. Later he did a piece called On Being Invisible, which used event-related potential. So those are simply electrical signals that happen as a result of some external event. So if you flash a light, you might get an ERP, an event-related potential, or if you played a sound. So it's not it's signal that's coming from the brain of the performer, but it's triggered by an external event. Those are called event-related potential. So he used that to use two performers to create some sound. So we would audio of that. There's this kind of synthesizer type sound in one of them, and the other he used piano and voices. So certainly interesting. Hard to know about the neuroscience behind that. We don't really have a lot there. It's nice conceptually, but who knows if they were really listening to real brain signal at all. People have gotten a lot more sophisticated in recent years, and there's been use of pre-recorded EEG to control sound and music. There's been use of different bandwidth, different bands of EEG signal to control style of music, like a kind of a DJ would switch between different styles, or using visual evoked potentials to control mixing of music. So visual evoked potentials are, if you have a flashing light, you can measure a certain rhythm in the back of the brain. I'll show you an example of a brain-computer interface that uses that. So if you flash something at 15 hertz, your visual cortex will have a 15 hertz rhythm. It's a visual evoked potential, so it's evoked by the visual stimulus. Or converting EEG signal from a seizure into sound, which kind of brings up interesting ideas about how you might monitor seizure patients instead of looking at the EEG, by listening. So this one got some good attention in the popular press. This is a seizure happening. It's been sonified. And the sounds they chose were vocal type sounds. They try to make it sound a little more human. You can hear what happens with a seizure typically is the frequency and the amplitude increase over time, and then they eventually decrease after the seizure kind of burns out. You can hear it picking up in frequency. I'll move on. A typical seizure lasts about 3 to 5 minutes, and so eventually it slows down and it follows the whole evolution of a natural evolution of a seizure. But the idea would be you could possibly just be listening while doing something else. A technician could be monitoring, and if they heard that sound coming on, they could go in the room and stop the seizure. So brain-computer interfaces are, I've already been talking about them a bit, but they're basically a direct communication pathway between the brain and some kind of external computing device or a machine. The idea would be to assist or augment or repair different sensory motor or cognitive functions in humans. And scientists, neuroscientists have been doing research on this since the 70s, so a good 50 years or so. It started at UCLA with some grants from the NSF and DARPA, and even now in the year 2016 with surface EEG, again, just listening here, like this person here has a cap with electrodes on, we really, because of problems of artifact and specificity, we really can only get to about 75, 80% accuracy. So if you're trying to control a cursor on a screen, you can get, after lots of training, years of training and really good algorithms, you can maybe get up to 75% accuracy. And if you think about that, if you're trying to control a robot arm for someone who's paralyzed, that's not good enough. If it's going in the wrong direction 25% of the time, that's going to be a problem and dangerous, quite honestly. So why is that? It's all the artifact I was talking about, all the noise, the specificity, the signal-to-noise ratio is not so great. And specificity, I also mean not knowing what a lot of these signals mean, even if we do see them. So there are different signals that have been used to try to drive these BCIs, these brain-computer interfaces. One is these slow cortical potentials, and by slow I mean happening over 1 to 2 seconds. That's slow for EEG. They require lots of training, so people can get good at them, but months and months. Problems include that they're very variable between, some people are just good at it and some people are not. There have been interesting studies with patients who had PTSD or were alcoholics, and anything that kind of disrupts your cognitive focus can make you less good at these things. But they can also be used as training for those types of problems to help people kind of focus and direct their cognitive skills somewhere else. That's the slow cortical potentials. Another signal that's been used is the P300. P300 is called P300 because it's positive at about 300 milliseconds. And what that is, it's an event-related potential. So we talked about event-related potentials before. If something new comes up in any sensory modality in your field of vision, your audition, sensory stimulus that's new, you'll get a P300. You can measure it, and it'll pop up fairly reliably. It can be almost anything if it's infrequent. So I show you a picture of an elephant, and then I show you a picture of an elephant. I show you another picture of an elephant. Your brain gets pretty bored pretty quickly, and you don't really pay much attention to it. If I suddenly show you a picture of a monkey, you'll get a P300. That's different. And then I go back to elephant, elephant, elephant. If I show you the monkey once, you get the P300. If I show you the monkey 3 or 4 more times, the P300 goes away. So basically, it just means there's something new. We can see that pretty reliably. It could be again, it could be a picture, it could be a sound, it could be a tactile sensation. That's been used as a control signal. So you can make spellers out of this. People who can't speak, but they have intact cognition, they can look at a field of letters and they'll get a P300 when the infrequent stimulus, one of the letters that they want, shows up. So you show them 5 letters and they want the letter E. If as you go through the different letters, when the E comes up, they'll get a P300. And so you can use that to start spelling words. You get E, and then you show another group of 5 letters. You can imagine it's pretty tedious, because if you want to go through all 26 letters, you have to show 5 at a time, or, that can take a while. But that's been used as a signal. Another is these steady-state visual evoked potentials. So I talked about those briefly, but they're, if you see a certain frequency of light, you can measure that exact same frequency and a potential in the back of the brain. Those are very reliable. They're easy to bring up. The trouble is that the way that they've been used mostly is by showing light at different frequencies on a screen. So you have 5 different frequencies, and you look at the one that you're interested in. So if you want to move a cursor around, you might have 4 directions, and there'll be one frequency of light here, one down there, one on the left, one on the right. You have to look over, then you can measure that you're looking at that one. So that perhaps makes some sense. The trouble with that is that if you have someone who's truly locked in and they can't move their eyes, one, so that's not going to be very helpful. They have to move their eyes to be able to come up with that signal. 2, if they move their eyes over to the signal, you don't really need to measure that from the brain. You can just look at their eyes. And we have eye trackers. It's kind of an elaborate way to measure where they're looking. Sure, we're measuring brain signal, but if you can do that, just put an eye tracker on the person, and it's a lot simpler than measuring EEG signal. But that's one signal that's been used, and I'll show you an example of a BCI with SSVP. Another is event-related desynchronization. So that's a very long term for what I was talking about with the posterior dominant rhythm and the mu rhythm, these resting potentials that go away once that part of the brain is activated. So if you start moving the arm or start thinking about the arm, you will desynchronize that part of the brain. The synchrony is the mu rhythm that'll go away. That's a fairly reliable signal. It takes training, and it's present in maybe 80–85% of people, so some people just won't be able to use it, and some are better than others, but it's a signal that we can measure fairly reliably. With training, can become pretty good, maybe 75–80% accuracy, and it doesn't require movement. So that's very useful. You can just think moving, not think moving. So those are some of the more common signals used. Here's an example of one of these brain-computer interfaces. This is from the laboratory of Raj Rao. He's at UW at the Center for Sensory Motor Neural Engineering. And this is a somatosensory steady-state visual evoked potential BCI. So the one I was talking about where you look at different parts of the screen and look at the flashing lights. And this guy is controlling a robot. So you can see the different flashing lights. And for the different commands, you look at the flashing light that corresponds to the command you want. And that in turn sends the signal to the robot, who will hopefully execute the command that you asked the robot.
Experiment started.
Okay, so I'm going to grab the orange juice.
It's not the speediest thing in the world. You'll also notice that he's moving both his eyes and his head to direct his gaze at one of these dots, and we can very easily measure gaze and head movement without looking at brain signal whatsoever. So it's neat, it's a great proof of principle, but maybe not as useful for a lot of patients who can't move or can't move their eyes, and maybe not the most direct way to do this. So again, if you have a brain-computer interface that is at the surface, we can get to this level where we're improving slowly, but we're kind of bumping up against the ceiling of resolution in terms of our spatial resolution and our signal to noise and understanding of the signal that we're measuring out there. And machine learning, regression analysis, these things are all helping, and we're still improving. But the quickest way to get good signal and reliable signal without much noise is to go inside the skull and go directly to the brain. Now, we obviously can't do that with a lot of people, but there are patients that we have in epilepsy who have intractable seizures. And those seizures, intractable, by that I mean 3 or 4 medicines, they continue to have seizures. And they're having so many seizures that their life is disrupted. And they're miserable enough or non-functional enough that they are willing to undergo brain surgery to remove that part of the brain that the seizures come from. So for certain patients where we have very localized seizures, they're intractable to medicines, we will go in, we'll monitor the electrical activity, the EEG, by putting electrodes directly on the brain or electrodes implanted directly in the brain to try to localize exactly where the seizures are coming from. So obviously you don't want to take out a huge chunk of brain to get rid of their seizures and then they can't walk or they can't speak anymore. They've cured them of their seizures. So we want to take out the smallest piece of brain we can to end the seizures but not give them major disability. So that began a whole process of learning how to map each individual's brain. Everyone's brain is a little different and general regions are the same, but the exact details of where the hand is or where the sensation is or where language areas are, it's individually variable. So we'd put electrodes on the brain or in the brain and learned a huge amount. And in the process, sometimes we're able to collect other data and learn other things about the brain. The signal is great. There's none of those noise problems we talked about. We can get to the level where we can actually see commands for movement that are more specific than move the hand, more directional or vector type movements. We're going to move the hand in that direction and at this velocity. And so brain-computer interfaces using implanted electrodes are getting much higher than 75–80% accuracy and much more sophisticated control. You can kind of see with this on the left, the cross-section there of the brain. We're measuring EEG at the surface. We have to go through skull. We have to go through membranes, skin, fluid. We're talking about a distance of 1.5 centimeters or 2 centimeters, which may not sound like much, but that diffuses the signal a huge amount. On top of that, you're just farther away distance-wise. So there's attenuation of signal from all these materials and just distance. And we get by all that by putting electrode directly in there. Of course, the disadvantage of all that is you've just cut someone's skull open. So it's brain surgery. By implanting an electrode, they're very fine electrodes, but you can do some damage with the electrodes themselves. On top of it, if you have this implant in there, they get infected eventually. We're better and better about sterile technique, antibiotics, but eventually they almost all get infected. On top of that, over time they scar off. So scar tissue forms and then the signal is no longer good. And you'd have to move the electrode or remove it. And you've now caused some scar. So those are some of the disadvantages. On the right, we have a example of one of the implants. It's a grid of implanted electrodes, and there's about 100 electrodes there on that chip. And just for comparison, it's on top of that penny, and that's the size. So it's quite tiny. And then the other arrow is pointing to the interface at the skull, and that is where the amplifier is and battery port, et cetera. So that thing has to be on the outside of the skull. We pretty much always need to have something facing outward. It can be under a skin flap sometimes, but you can understand why that might be a problem for infection. So this is good for a certain type of patient, a very limited type of patient. You can really restore some function to someone who's disabled, but it's probably not going to last, and it carries inherent risk. So it'd be nice to be able to just do a lot of this with surface EEG, but we're really bumping up against lots of technical difficulties. So I was studying brain-computer interfaces and studying music in parallel as I'm doing neurology and neuroscience research, and I thought, wow, it would be really neat if we can only get 75% accuracy for moving a robot arm or a cursor. That's probably good enough to generate music, as long as it sounds good most of the time, and that 25% of the time doesn't sound horrible. I first thought this would just be kind of a fun, interesting project. I'd seen other people try to create music with EEG, and they hadn't really understood the signal as well, and it just wasn't done well. And I said, I think I could create a device that, with reasonable accuracy, is able to generate music. And so that was kind of the rationale behind it. The signals I use are not actually musical, so you're not thinking about music. I'm using some of those signals we talked about, like the motor imagery. You're thinking about movement, and that gets translated into musical signals, into musical production. And the goals were, as I said, originally it was just creative. At first I wanted to make a new musical instrument. I thought it would be really fun and interesting from an artistic standpoint and music standpoint. But as I've developed it, I've found that I've learned a lot about the feedback, the biofeedback aspects, and I naturally started thinking, well, I have all these patients with disability. How could I use this for therapeutics? So I'm now working on it in terms of cognitive therapy for stroke, ALS, spinal cord injury. And as you'll see, one particular patient who ended up having a disability that was absolutely perfect for the encephalophone. So the basic design, I have this EEG. It's a research-grade EEG. There's lots of commercial EEGs out there available now for the consumer, which, quite frankly, are not very good. They're mostly not listening to brain signals. So I got a good research-grade EEG. I process it in a PC. Use the acquisition software, and then we stream to MATLAB, and most of the computation happens in MATLAB. So we're doing signal processing of filtering, using the relevant electrodes from the right region of the brain, then taking the proper frequency band and applying algorithms that then generate a number from 1 to 8 out of the signal power from a certain part of the brain. Mostly I'm using motor cortex, so I'm doing signal power from 1 to 8 motor cortex. I start off with an initialization, and then we do a calibration. The calibration means each individual is a little different, and so we need to calibrate for each person and for each day. Between day to day, you might be different, and between individuals, there are definitely differences. So we calibrate by having the person go through the motor imagery while we measure their output, and then we create a histogram of all the data points and then divide them up into 8 bins. And from that, we get a simple number from 1 to 8, then stream it to music generation software. So originally we were working with Max MSP, and now working with Super Collider, which is a platform that's particularly good for music production and performance. So this is the early demo, the very beginning, very crude. There's some video artifacts, sorry about that. So here it's just a piano in the C scale. Spending a lot of time on the top C. So that's the very first one in my studio, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. But I went on and said, it's easy to put electrodes on people's heads and say I'm generating music from brain signal that you're intentionally controlling. There's lots of things out there that you can just convince people of anything, but is it really working? Is it scientifically viable? Is it actually controlling anything? So we did some initial experiments where we were just taking a bunch of individuals, 15 healthy subjects, and we just gave them very, very little training. We gave them a few minutes explanation of how this works, and we wanted to see our total novices able to control a musical pitch. So pretty challenging, actually, not doing any training at all, or a few minutes of training. What we did was we gave them a few minutes to play around after we calibrate, and then I gave them 5 minutes to hit certain pitches. They had to hit the same pitch 3 times in a row, because if they hit it by random just once, it's not too interesting. You could hit it by random. So 3 tones in a row, and you got 10 seconds. Within 10 seconds, you have to match the pitch 3 times in a row. If you don't match it, you don't score a hit, and you start another trial. If you do hit it, you score a hit within 10 seconds, and then another pitch is given. And just see how many you can hit in 5 minutes. So we tested their accuracy. There's no point in showing that. That's just a whole lot of numbers that you can't really read, but that's so the range of ages, range of genders, and we also noted their years of musical training, because we wanted to see roughly, it's not a great number with 15, but roughly is there a correlation with musical training? I suspect there would be. So we were able to see that random, it turns out, is down here. So this is what happens if you just randomly generate 1 to 8 and run it through. And everyone did better than random using both the posterior dominant rhythm, so that's that visual cortex resting rhythm, and the motor, or mu, motor imagery task. The posterior dominant rhythm is a little easier because essentially all you need to do to control it is close and open your eyes. If you close your eyes, the signal goes up. If you open your eyes, the signal goes down. The motor task is a little more difficult because it requires imagery. You need to imagine movement or not imagine movement, which, as you might imagine, takes a little bit more concentration and focus. And in fact, people did better with the PDR than they did the posterior dominant rhythm, the visual task, than with the motor task. But everyone did well above average, and the average was reasonably high, 55% there and 65% there. Remember, these are novices. There's no training, or a few minutes of training, if you will. We also looked at the skew bias to try to make sure that people weren't just always hitting one of the notes, and just by sheer chance they would, if they were constantly putting out only one note, they would hit that note. And there were some people who were skewed, and you can see this one, they were really skewed towards the 8. This one's pretty skewed towards the 1, but on the whole, not a lot of skew bias. And then in terms of the musical training, we saw a trend, and there was certainly a trend for increased accuracy with musical training, but it wasn't significant. But what we're going to do now is, now that we've shown that it just works on a basic level, that's not random, people do have some level of accuracy, reasonable. We'd like to get it a lot higher, obviously. We know from past data that with motor imagery, training, it makes a huge difference. So if you train people for a few months, they get better. They just get better by sheer training. So we're now in the process of taking a limited number of people, and we're intentionally taking ringers. We're taking people who are good. We're taking people who have musical training and they do well on the initial task. We want to see how well they can do. We're just going to take them for 3 months and test them every 2 weeks. And we'll give them training as well as testing. The training will involve, or is involving, them playing freely along with the music. So they can just kind of solo along with pre-recorded music. They're in the right key. And just have fun. It's a game, really, but they're improvising. There's a volume pedal, so they're producing notes constantly, and it's not very musical to just constantly produce notes. So they have a volume pedal. They can shut off and on the sound so that they can use phrasing and different types of rhythmic aspects. And then in terms of testing, we were only testing 2 notes before, and then after they do 2 notes, we then test them on 3 notes. Can they hit the tonic and the octave and the 5th, and then can they hit the tonic and the 3rd and the 5th and the octave, to give them progressively more difficult tasks and a little more musical tasks. And we have taken the encephalophone and used it both for performance and for therapy. So I'm starting to enroll patients who have motor disability to use the encephalophone, but I had one particular case that was just perfect for it, and I'll show you a video to kind of describe it. There's a woman who had the exact lesion that this device, really a 1 in a million case that this device could treat. And there's also some performances coming up at the 92 Seattle Festival, where I'll be playing the encephalophone with an ensemble of musicians live for a concert of about a half hour long. And there's some visuals that will involve showing my brain signal in live video format, as well as hearing me play live along with these musicians. So I'm going to play this video, and this kind of describes both of these things, if I can get it to work. Let's see.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost. I once was lost, but now. That's the Manhattan Project there.
Right, it's beautiful countryside. It's a big, small town.
Yeah, it
We're a
is,
small, big-
along
can
the
you
river. We
push
live
back a little?
right by the river.
We're
And
a small city, yeah, it's near
with
the,
the river.
yeah.
And then the other thing is,
Near the Palouse. Oh, sorry, Tom.
yeah, that probably sounds good.
All right, here we go.
I was on service, meaning I was covering the neurology admissions to the hospital when Margaret presented to the emergency department with, I think, the only time I've ever had a chief complaint of I can't sing.
I'm Margaret Haney, and I teach 5th grade.
The emergency department doctors took her seriously, which was great. Ended up getting an MRI, and when it was abnormal, she was admitted to me to help figure out what the cause was of her problem.
I was attempting to sing with my students in the classroom, and I tried to just impromptu sing Summertime, which has quite a range, and I failed miserably, like I never have. And my students were giving me some funny looks. So I tried instead to sing Oh, What a Beautiful Morning from Oklahoma. And I couldn't find the notes to save my life, and it's a song I've been singing since I was 4 years old.
Her neurologic exam otherwise was completely normal, and you would think she was normal until she started to try and sing, and it was off key. She could get kind of the rhythm of a song, but it would be off pitch and off key.
And so one of my students sneaked back to the computer, a couple of them, on the computer and Googled, what does it mean when you can't find familiar notes that you've known your whole life? And up came a musia, and they brought me a printout that I pretended to not be alarmed about, but when I saw the words brain damage, then I thought, I've had a stroke.
It turned out she didn't have a stroke, but she did have an encephalitis, an infection of the brain, a viral infection of the brain. And it was so specific that it only took out her ability to generate music.
The majority of people who have encephalitis present after they have a seizure, or they start to get weak on one side or have really serious symptoms. But I think in Margaret's case, it was found really early because of the singing.
Dr. Hensley came to me and said, you really should see this case. This is right up your alley. It's someone I know you would be interested in. I talked to her about your work, and she's very interested in meeting you. And she showed me the MRI of the brain. And as she started to bring it up, I said, you know what, don't show it to me. I'm going to tell you exactly where her lesion is. And sure enough, I was correct down to the centimeter. There's a very specific part of the brain that would be used in this function, and sure enough, she had an infection of just that one part of her brain. The encephalophone is a musical instrument that's generated, where music is generated from brain waves, or the electrical activity of the brain. It is essentially a brain-computer interface which generates music as opposed to visual feedback, for example. So what it does is it takes intentional control, so thoughts, if you will, that can be directed towards generating scalar music, so musical notes. So this is on my head. It's measuring the electrical activity of the brain. We particularly focus on one area or another. So the main control mode that we use is the motor cortex. So up here on the left side of the brain is the motor cortex. So in this case, we listen to the motor cortex, and then we use imagery of thinking about moving the right arm. The motor cortex has a resting pattern. So if you're awake and you're not doing anything, you're not moving in particular, but you're awake, there's a resting pattern that we can measure right here. And when you go to move, if I go and I move my right arm, that resting activity will go away. The brain will be kicked into gear, and there'll be other patterns that can be pulled out that are initiating movement of the right arm. You got it. There you go. The middle one's a little tougher. I talked to Margaret, and we decided to try to use the encephalophone as a therapy for her. So she had lost the ability to generate pitches the natural way with her normal brain mechanism, but the encephalophone uses a different part of the brain. So she had part of her right temporal cortex, that part of her brain over here was not functioning because of this encephalitis. And who knows if it was going to come back. It certainly wasn't going to heal completely, but maybe heal a little bit. So that part is gone. The encephalophone was using this part, the left motor cortex, a totally different area, in order to generate music. So I thought, if we can train her to use this part of the brain, she may be able to generate pitches using the encephalophone. Not so much singing, but by using her motor cortex, and she might learn a new way or a new circuit, a new pathway in order to generate pitches on a musical scale. So we took her in, we gave her a standard test of amusia to get a baseline to understand where her disabilities lay. And then we began testing her and training her with the encephalophone. We would have her play along with music just freely, and then we would test her on a note tester that would ask her to try to hit certain pitches.
But I can aim for the sound and know that I haven't hit it and adjust it. I haven't worked so hard in all my life.
She began to use this and improved her pitch finding ability somewhat. It was really a pretty unique application for the encephalophone. In fact, it's kind of a 1 in a million case that was exactly the type of lesion or problem with the brain that the encephalophone could address. I thought it would be both interesting from an artistic standpoint, but also from a potential therapeutic aspect to take one of these brain-computer interfaces and have it generate in real time scalar music, just to make an instrument, essentially, just like you would create a new musical instrument with a different type of control. This control would be EEG. Going forward, planning on using it not so much for amusia cases, because they will probably continue to be 1 in a million pure amusia, but patients who have lost their ability to move their arms or legs from stroke or from other disorders can use the encephalophone to generate music. Even if they can't move their arm to play a violin or a piano, they'd be able to generate music using their motor cortex, even if that motor cortex doesn't drive the use of their arm. I also hope one day to take that, if someone has learned this use of their motor cortex to generate music, tie that into their rehab. So someone undergoing physical therapy to try to improve their strength could use the encephalophone by itself at first, but then start using it alongside their physical therapy, so that eventually maybe we can improve their movement. All right. So, that was made by a filmmaker friend of mine, so he really made things look good there. Really made me look good. So where we go with this, I talked about a little bit of it. I have to use a really dramatic picture to keep you awake at this point in the talk. Musically, there's lots of ways to go with this. We're generating notes on a musical scale right now. We can change key if we want. We could use it scale free to use it to control a theremin-like application. We could change chords with the signal, change tempo, change instrument groups or timbre of the instrument. Those are all possible signals. Diagnostically, it could be used to just hear, so much like they were sonifying seizures. If I could apply this different musical instruments to different rhythms, we might be able to hear changes in rhythm while monitoring a patient for epilepsy or for stroke or something like encephalopathy, where part of the brain becomes slow all of a sudden. There's been evidence before from others, including Psyche Louis, who's a cognitive neuroscientist, who showed that you could rapidly learn seizures just by sonifying in the right way. So we might be able to apply it that way diagnostically. And then therapeutically, we were talking about it a bit, but first, just as a means of expression for someone who's lost the ability to express themselves musically or verbally or with their arm or their leg, but also cognitive therapy for motor impaired patients. It's already been shown that neurologic music therapy can improve executive function with people in traumatic brain injury, so there's reason to believe that a more sophisticated music therapy using EEG signal might be able to improve cognitive function. And then, as I said, I'd hope if people learn to use this encephalophone to generate music, that we could eventually tie that to their motor rehab. And while they're generating music, we can suddenly introduce movement. So if they're able to move their finger just a little bit, they're playing a note, and play a high note and move the finger a little bit, it might help motivate them through their physical therapy. And then eventually you could probably remove the music aspect if you wanted. But those sort of future directions of places I might go. Things going on right now, I'm going to put in a blatant plug for this show coming up. So again, I got funding from For Culture and from 9E2. 9E2 is a redux of an art and technology festival that happened in 1966 in New York called 9 Evenings, Experiments in Theater and Engineering. And we're celebrating the 50th anniversary with a whole new set of art and technology projects. So they include performances and installations, and it's going to be going over 9 evenings here in Seattle at King Street Station starting on Friday. We have 2 performances of our group called the Encephalophone Ensemble, where I'll be playing live improvised music with the encephalophone along with 4 jazz musicians, and there'll be visuals that will be showing my brain signal in real time. So that's going to be on the 22nd and the 24th, so Saturday night and Monday night at King Street Station. It's at 9e2seattle.org. So I hope you all can come. I think that might be right up your alley. That's my blatant plug. And that's all I have. I think I'll pass on.
Russ is up next.
thank you for having me. My name is Russ Engold. A little bit about my background. It's not as involved as Tom's. I actually tried to drop out of school in 4th grade. I stopped going to school for about a week and a half before my parents caught on. And I could do this because I have 6 brothers, so you can kind of go unnoticed. But to their better judgment, they sent me back to school, and I eventually finished college with an engineering degree, actually in agricultural engineering. I want to be a farmer, but my PE's in mechanical engineering, and I got into robotics after college, and eventually into exoskeletons. So that's kind of what got me here, but interesting past. So just a show of hands, how many people here know what an exoskeleton is? Most everyone, right? So when we started working on this, or when I started working on it, was back in 2004. And if I would have asked that question, well, maybe this crowd, everyone would have raised their hands. But the majority of the population didn't know what an exoskeleton was. You get, a few people that would raise their hands that had seen aliens or had read Starship Troopers. But with the media and the help of Iron Man, everyone knows what an exoskeleton is, and everyone has expectations that we should all be able to fly now, which is not the case. So flashback to the early exoskeletons, and this is what you have, right? Let's see if this works.
Get away from her, you bitch!
So a lot of people, that's my first memory of an exoskeleton, and it's actually really interesting. We worked with the company that made that prop back in, that was 1986, 85. And what you can't see is there's actually a puppeteer behind, what's her name, Sigourney Weaver? Ripley. And he's actually moving the prop, and so they are walking, and it is functional, but you just can't see it. But the idea of an exoskeleton is not a new idea, right? It's been around for a long time. So back to 1890, there's some early patent drawings of folks that were trying to accomplish this. And this whole idea of, I think fundamentally humans are lazy, right? So we're all lazy. We're all looking for the easy button. How do we get skinnier without, actually having a diet? How do we get stronger without actually going to the gym? And so I think there's this low level, like fundamental interest in exoskeletons. How can we be stronger without putting in the work? So back in 1960, GE tried to make the Hardy-Man, which was a big project for theirs. Rumor has it that they actually never turned it on with somebody in it because they were actually afraid it would tear them apart. So they made an attempt at it. And then in early 2000, DARPA went after it and started put basically a challenge out there, like who can make this an exoskeleton to really help soldiers with the amount of injuries they're having on the battlefields and the amount of weight that soldiers carry. Is there a way we can use exoskeletons to prevent injury? Because it's still the number 2 issue for the U.S. Army is injuries due to musculoskeletal injuries. It's back injuries, knee injuries. It's not bullets. And so they started investing in technology, and all of a sudden you see this flurry of activity in exoskeletons. So we were part of it at UC Berkeley as part of the DARPA program. There was other projects. Sarcos was part of it. But you see all this activity happen, and I kind of highlight like 2005 as the date when finally the actuators and the batteries, the sensors, the computing power, it kind of all, we kind of made this, it got to this point where we could make these things feasible and get past the things that look like the behemoths of the Hardy-Man that were actually plugged into the wall. So in 2004, we actually had the world's first untethered powered exoskeleton called Bleaks. Here's a video of it. And you can actually hear it running in the background. So this is a hydraulically actuated 6 degree of freedom exoskeleton, powered ankles, powered knees, powered hips. This is Dr. Zoss, still works with us at Exobionics. His PhD thesis is in exoskeletons. And so the way I got started is actually one of my former colleagues is working on this project on the power supply side, and he showed me this video and he said, hey, we need someone to come up and help make Gen 2 of this one to help take it to the next level. And I saw this video and I said, man, this is the future. This is it. I quit my job. I moved up there. And week one, I realized that that entire backpack on the back of that thing was the power supply. So it's basically a self-licking ice cream cone, right? It could carry its own power supply, but that was about it. You weren't going to put any extra weight on it. This is as fast as it could walk. And the reason I got involved was I had one of my brothers was Ryan. So here's my brother and I. He had gone to the Naval Academy, and we both played football. He was at the Naval Academy. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL. I was getting recruited to go to West Point to play football. And he came back winter break and told me what life was like at the academy. And I said, well, time out. I have a problem with authority. So you go be a Navy SEAL, I'll be an engineer, and someday I'll make you cool stuff. So that was a deal we had made. So when I saw the video, it was like, oh, this is perfect. So my brother was successful, became a Navy SEAL, and a good one at that. And so I quit my job, move up there, and I show him that video. And he says, we're never going to use it. I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, it's too loud, it's too slow, it's too heavy. So life lesson, right? Show the technology to the customer before you bet the farm on it. But that was okay. I had a year to try to fix it and figure out some solutions. And then actually 1 week later, so that was week one. 1 week later, I get the call. My brother had an accident and broke his neck. So I get on an airplane, flying across the country to go see him, thinking about how we can apply this exoskeleton technology to get him up and walking again. So I get to Virginia Beach. I walk into his hospital room. I said, brother, don't worry, we'll get you up and walking again. And he says, I can walk just fine, I just can't move my arms. So he had what's called central cord syndrome, so he lost nerve damage to his arms. And through the course of a couple years, he got his strength back. He calls himself the world's strongest incomplete quadriplegic. And here's a picture of us this summer surfing out on Shasta Lake. So he recovered, and he's fine. He still has lingering issues, but he'll never let anybody know about it. But the thing that stuck with us was his ability to do a ton of rehab, basically at home, starting with really small tasks because he had no strength, and then building up to bigger and bigger tasks as he could build that strength to the point where now he can do 20 pull-ups. And what stuck with us is, how do you do that if you lose the ability to walk, right? If you can't take that first step, how do you get that repetition in and the training to get you back up and back to walking? And so it kind of steered our focus a little bit. We still had to focus on the power requirements. That first exoskeleton used 5 kilowatts. So imagine your lawnmower on the back. So we had to solve some technology problems. But at the end of the day, we realized that there was much broader applications for the technology. So we focused on solving the technology problems, and we also looked at different applications. And we launched our first commercial medical exoskeleton in 2012, and since then we've had over 6,000 users take over 73 million steps. So we actually have a modem in each one of our devices, so we can see this on a daily basis. We have a counter that goes up at the office. It's pretty cool. So it's pretty cool to see the technology have that kind of impact on such a broad population. So I'll go into a little bit on the medical side. So we have this Exo GT. What is it, right? So it's a wearable robot. It's has 4 degrees of freedom, 2 powered. Can't make it move. Hang on. Stuck. Oop, there we go. Jump back. So it's mainly sold to rehabilitation hospitals. So it's optimized for a clinic. It's adjustable. You can go from a stroke patient to a spinal cord injury patient in 5 minutes. All the lengths are adjustable depending on the size of the individual, and then the software actually adapts to the user. So just like my brother, as he was getting stronger, the whole idea was, can we make a machine that can sense the user's capability, and as that user gets stronger, gains more strength, the exo or the machine can get weaker until eventually they don't need it anymore. And that's exactly what we're doing today with stroke patients. So I have some videos here of stroke rehabilitation, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but here's the current way. Let's see if it plays. On the left here, you'll see the current therapy, or the way people typically do rehabilitation for stroke patients. So you have 3 physical therapists trying to get this individual in parallel bars to take clean steps, trying to get them to get some repetition in there. And then on the right, you see an individual walking in the exo. And then there's 2 videos playing at once. I'm ADD, so this works for me. But the person here in the middle, that's that same patient now walking in an exo, and it's much easier. The video on the far, on your right, that's, if you watch the beginning of that, which it'll replay, it kind of showed him trying to walk without the exoskeleton and then walking with the exo, and then this is him now walking just post one therapy session in an exoskeleton. And so watch this and then watch the beginning step, and you can kind of see the difference in his gait patterns.
What show you?
Where now he's trusting that injured leg a little bit more, taking bigger steps. And so that's after one session. So it's, the brain's amazing, humans are amazing in general. It's really hard to compete with them. But what we realized is, with the assistance of an exoskeleton, you can go from, an initial therapy session of taking or walking 7 feet to walking 344 feet in that same session with the help of an exoskeleton. So what that means to the patient is more repetition, right? You're upright, you're walking, you're getting your natural gait. The exoskeleton's actually constraining you a little bit so that you're walking through a natural step trajectory, and you're not trying to do any of the hip hiking or trying to alter your gait in ways to compensate, because humans are really adaptable and we can figure out ways to walk even if we're missing muscles or they're weak. We will figure out a way to move, and sometimes that's not the best case for the long term. So using the exoskeleton, these users can get lots of repetition in with exoskeletons, and eventually, like I said, the exo can actually sense how much capability they're putting in. And it's really interesting to see. The first time we did this, we put it on an individual, and the therapist, well, that was actually one of the really interesting things. Early on, when we came to the rehab centers with an exoskeleton, everyone thought, or the therapist thought, that you were trying to replace them, the therapist's job, with a robot or with an exoskeleton. When the reality is, it's just a tool for the therapist to use, right? So instead of muscling through on those parallel bars, now they can use that exoskeleton, they can level up and actually watch the patients, pay more attention to how they're walking and how they're feeling during the therapy session, and then actually get real good metrics out on how they're performing. And so one of the tools is they can see the contribution capability of the patient. So say that the user can put in 60% of the strength required to walk, we can program the exo to put in the 40%, right? And then they'll actually take clean steps. But then that therapist can actually challenge the patient and dial it down and say, well, I'm only going to give you 30% of extra assistance. I'm going to require you to try to recruit more of those muscles to take that extra step. And the exo will actually go to take a step, and it won't finish it. And it'll give some audible clues for the user. And they do that a couple times, and then pretty soon they're actually recruiting those muscles and making that next step. It's kind of like going to the gym and pushing a little bit harder. But after 10 or 15 steps, now they're pretty exhausted from focusing so hard on trying to recruit those muscles, so the therapist can back it off. So the exo ends up being a really good therapy tool with measured outcomes to help progress the patients to the next level. So that's on the medical side. Where we are in the world, so primarily North America and Europe. Again, we sell to hospitals, and they use it. 8 to 10 patients per day can cycle through an exoskeleton as part of a therapy program. So that's our main commercial product. But at the end of the day, we realized that there's more applications for exoskeletons. So I have a little video here I can show you, kind of showing the breadth of both our medical exoskeletons and some of the other stuff we do, and I'll talk more about it afterwards.
Exobionics is changing what the human body is capable of. We believe in amplifying human potential. We have always been limited by what our bodies can physically do, until now. In our unique space in Richmond, California, we collaborate to produce the most revolutionary products in human enhancement on the market. Exobionics is the leading developer of wearable exoskeletons. We make ExoGT, a medical device that teaches spinal cord injury and stroke patients to walk again. Our revolutionary variable assist software responds to how the patient is walking and allows users to take data from the device to improve physical therapy. Patients in ExoGT have already taken over 60 million steps in more than 130 rehabilitation centers worldwide. And we're just getting started. We just launched ExoWorks, our line of exoskeletons that amplifies the abilities of construction and industry workers. With ExoWorks, they can do their jobs more safely and efficiently. At ExoBionics, we are changing the world with wearable exoskeletons by improving how we walk, work, and live. Take the next step with us at ExoBionics.
So obviously we're in the healthcare space. We actually started as a DARPA program. We still do work with DARPA and DoD trying to advance the technology to protect government soldiers, firefighters, first responders. But about a year and a half ago, we started getting a lot of interest from the industrial sector, industrial and construction companies. And it was really interesting for us because we had gone after that sector in like 2010, like bringing some technology out and kind of pushing it out to the market. And folks were like, no, this is science fiction. This is way out there. You guys are crazy. And so in a short period from 2010 to 2014, all of a sudden, our phone starts ringing and people are asking for the technology. And we're like, well, what happened? And so again, back to media, I don't know if they saw our medical exoskeletons, but the general assumption from the population or the market was, hey, we should have exoskeletons. So we went out and we started surveying that space and seeing what the issues were. And if you look at the construction industrial space, there's primarily three things they were concerned about. Safety being number one. In the U.S., we spend $21 billion in direct cost to overexertion injuries, and I'll go into a little bit more later. Productivity, how do we keep our workforce productive throughout the day and prevent fatigue? And then also in the U.S. and in Europe, there's a huge crisis with the aging population. Everyone's working longer. The younger workforce isn't coming into those fields, and so how are you going to get things done within an aging workforce? So going into a little bit more detail on the safety side, you look at this chart here, and the three red columns add up to $21 billion. So overexertion due to outside sources, other bodily reactions, and the microtasks, things that we think you can eventually solve with some sort of human augmentation type of technology. On the productivity side, we pull up this chart. This one's pretty interesting. So it shows the productivity improvement over time between the manufacturing space and construction space, where manufacturing has seen great gains. You know, it's almost 2x that of construction, who's remained relatively flat. And you ask yourself why? What's the cause for the big difference? And I think a lot of it can be attributed to robotics and automation. And so if you look in the manufacturing space or any sort of, I'd say, fixed asset type of production, you can implement robotics to help increase productivity and remove some of the labor component. Well, construction, it's a much different environment. So I actually found this chart from the Boston Consulting Group, which I thought was interesting. It talked about advanced robotics and where they're going. So if you look at the axes here, on the x-axis you have the environment, from a rigid environment on the left to an unstructured environment on the right. And then on the y-axis you have no logic needed to develops logic on the upper part of the axis. So if you think about a traditional robot that's going to weld a car together, that robot is not making any decisions, right? It's just a pre-programmed position-based machine that's going to go to the same spot every time and do the same weld, and it's fixed in place and nothing's changing, and it can do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Where things get interesting is when you start asking that robot to try to make decisions, right? Okay, we're either changing cars, or based on that environment, how are you gonna solve that problem? And that's really where we see the application for exoskeletons in this space, is augmenting the strength and endurance capabilities of machines with the decision making capabilities of humans, right? So if you look at a construction environment, right? Every day you go on that job site, it's different. They've built a new floor, things are changing, things are moving. And so having that human there where they can actually make the decisions and then augmenting them with some robotic capability to take them to the next level, that's really the sweet spot. And that's where you're going to start with human augmentation. It's not going to be replacing those factory robots because those things are doing a great job. So that was interesting insight for us. How many of you actually saw the DARPA Robotics Grand Challenge? Anybody watch that? You watched that? Nobody else? So I'll give you a quick snapshot. So this is the same DARPA Grand Challenge. If you think back to 2000, I think it was 2002. Was that the year of the driving Grand Challenge? Anyone remember 2002? So DARPA put out the Grand Challenge for self-driving vehicles in 2002. Year one, I think the farthest a car went was maybe 200 feet. And then 2 years later, these cars were driving a long ways, and now you see all the commercial investment into self-driving vehicles. Well, they did the same thing with robots, and they had the competition last year where they had this course where a robot had to get into a car, a humanoid robot had to get into a side-by-side vehicle, drive down a path, get out of that vehicle, open a door, shut the door. No, I don't even think it had to shut the door. Open the door, go in, turn a valve, use a drill to drill out a hole, go over some rubble, up a set of stairs, and then would finish. So it would take any one of you probably 2 minutes max to do that course, and the fastest robot could do it in about 30 minutes, with the majority of them failing miserably. And it just kind of highlighted how capable humans are and how far we have to go before robots catch up with us, which speaks to this slide here. So using this hybrid system where we can leverage human capabilities with robotic strength is going to be important going forward. As far as the aging workforce, sorry, my slide got messed up, but you can kind of see this trend from 1985 to 2014 of the older population, the 45 to 64-year-old segment of the construction space, industrial space is growing, and there's less and less younger folks coming in to fill those jobs. So I think it was last month they said there were 6,000 jobs that went unfilled in the construction space because they lack of skilled workers. And so they're paying their workers overtime and trying to figure out solutions to get things built. And so how are we going to help solve that, or how can we make people more productive? So after going out and surveying it, we decided, okay, maybe the time's right. We'll start up our what we call our ExoWorks division and see if we can augment workers. And what we realized is it's not just about exoskeletons, and it's not just about the technology. It's about how to get people to adopt the technology. So we have this what we call the ExoWorks system, and in the upper side or the upper quadrant, you see the exosuits, so full exoskeletons. We actually went out with those about a year and a half ago and started doing some testing with different construction companies around the world, and we made a minimum viable product for exoskeletons. It was passive, so no batteries, no sensors. We could hold heavy tools, and it was literally the simplest exoskeleton we could make to try to introduce it to that market. And the feedback we got was that's still a step too far. It's still too complicated. It's still too much to put on. And so not making the mistake I made that first time without talking to the customers with my brother, we spent a lot of time out in the field trying to understand really what their problems were and how we could solve them. And so what we realized is ladders don't exist today on job sites. The majority of workers work out of aerial platforms, scissor lifts, boom lifts, or on scaffolding. And so if we can make our system mount to those systems that they're already using, it makes it very easy for them to adopt. It's the same tool they're using, same platform they're using. We're just going in between, canceling the effects of gravity. So starting with those, then moving to vest systems, targeting shoulders. Again, if you look at the statistics, back injuries are going down. All the ergonomists have done a great job of making things lighter, showing people the right way to lift things, but there's still tasks that involve overhead use, and the shoulder is the most complicated joint on the human body. And anytime you're doing stuff overhead for long durations of time, it's rough on the shoulder, and it's the only injury. Back injuries are going down. Shoulder injuries are either staying flat or slightly going up. So it looked like another target for us. So what we have now is 3 systems. We have our exo mount systems, which either mounts to scaffolding or to aerials. And the whole idea here is to make the tools weightless, right? Some of these guys, I actually had never heard of a rivet buster until I started talking with some of these folks. And it's this tool that weighs like 35 pounds, and it's basically a handheld jackhammer to, demolish concrete. And they're like, oh yeah, we use this all the time. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, someone's supposed to use this all day? Like, that's cruel. And so looking at some of these heavy tools and making those weightless really makes people more productive. Then obviously our vest system, that's more about making your arms buoyant. So it's less about heavy tools, but even if you hold your hands overhead for a long time, say I'm a electrician or somebody working in the ceilings or using light tools, just doing this for a long time is exhausting on your shoulders and causes issues over time. So we have a solution there, and then eventually we'll get to the suits once people understand the value of making things weightless. So we have a video here, a comparison video. Maybe this one will play, but you can kind of get the snapshot based on the heart rate at the bottom. We have these two guys, and over the duration of the 70 minutes, Dwayne on the left here, his average heart rate for 70 minutes is 157. He's unaugmented. And Ed on the right, his average heart rate for the 70 minutes was about 109 with the augmentation tool. So let's see if this video plays. You can get a sense for it. The rising cost of safety due to on-the-job injuries is killing our productivity. And that's where the ExoWorks aerial system comes in. With the patented zero-gravity arm, the use of heavy hand tools becomes almost effortless by rendering them weightless. We decided to put the Exo Zero-G arm to the test to see if it could save time and money on the job site by getting the work done faster and protecting the worker from injury and strain. We gave the workers 2 identical drilling and chipping tasks. Dwayne will use traditional methods, while Ed will be assisted by the Exo Zero-G arm. We will be monitoring the heart rate, time, and progress as both workers complete the task. The results are impressive. The Exo Zero-G enabled worker finishes all the tasks while the other worker becomes too exhausted in the process. With the assistance of the Zero-G arm, the worker completes the task faster and with significantly less effort and fatigue. So what if you could complete your heavy hand tool task faster, with better accuracy and less injuries? Now you can, with the ExoWorks aerial mount system. So a lot of time people ask, rising cost. Well, how long did it take Dwayne to finish? And the answer is he didn't finish, he wasn't going to finish, and he wasn't going to show up to work the next day. He was so smoked after that, like he was going to find a career change, right? So it's literally the task at hand, and until you've tried to run one of those heavy tools all day, it's unbelievable. So here's what some of our customers are saying, right? And this is really the cool thing about this is at the end of the day, we're all about helping people, right? So that worker feels better, but they're also more productive, and they're going to be able to get more done. So you see now one man operates safely and precisely. They use half the manpower and producing nearly twice the output. So it's a 4x increase in productivity. So that's a real saver for folks. And at the end of the day, everyone feels better. So that's pretty cool. We just did a job down at Shell where they were doing a refractory turnaround. And they originally assumed that it was going to take 14 days. It was, 18 guys, 14 days, working 12 hours a day. With the use of the arm, they thought it would cut it back to about a 10-day job. In actuality, it cut it down to a 6-day job. So huge productivity increase, and the guys feel a lot better while using it. So at the end of the day, we're going to change the way work gets done, greater capability, higher quality of work. As someone's working throughout the course of the day, if they're not getting so exhausted, the quality of their work stays up. So if someone's a welder or even doing some of the construction work, quality matters and reduces number of rework. Worker retention and attraction, bringing people into the jobs, attracting other individuals that maybe didn't have the physical strength to do these kind of tasks before. Now they can, so you're opening the aperture for different workers. You reduce injuries, and injuries are expensive. I mean, you look at, what was that, $21 billion in direct costs. If you talk to a large company, the indirect cost is usually 6x times the direct cost. So that's a lot of money we're spending on injuries. So if we can prevent some of those, it's a real win for the economy. Task efficiency, obviously, and then lower costs. But I'll circle back on the industrial side with the aliens thing. So that was filmed in 1986, but the actual year it took place was 2020. So even though I say this is the last thing we're going to do, we basically got 4 years to get cracking to put one of these on the job. But realistically, we could make one of these today. It's actually not that complicated. But all of the safety guys on the job would never let you bring it on there. So it's a process. We're working towards it. So going back to these other industries, obviously industry is a big sector, healthcare, government, consumer space. We think there's applications across the board for this kind of technology. I just was two weekends ago, I was in Switzerland, and they had the world's first augmented Olympics. So did anybody hear about this? No? Yeah, it was called the Cybathlon. So it was actually fantastic. So what they said, they had 4,600 visitors. They had competitions ranging from a brain-computer interface race. So they had different individuals with their brain control interface on there, and then they had a track, and you could watch them on the video screen as they were racing, and they were trying to hit the notes, basically for each one of the courses. And they had everything from, upper body amputees to lower leg amputees to exoskeletons to wheelchairs to FES, bike races. I mean, it was a whole thing, and it was a great success for me. Being year one, getting that kind of showing. I forget how many different countries were there. 66 international teams. So a big showing, world's first. I think they're planning on doing it every 4 years, maybe 2 in different countries, depending on it. But it's kind of that first sector, and it makes you start thinking about, where this stuff is going. How can we augment, not just the disabled, but how do you augment someone that's fully capable to make them superhuman, right? Turns out it's really hard to do. We've tried in several things. I mean, humans are amazing machines, and we're extremely capable at doing lots of things. So what you're really going to see is kind of task-specific augmentation. I think is the first that first wave where you're doing things like effectively what we're doing in the industrial space is canceling the effects of gravity. Right, we're not adding any other forces in there, but going after some of the harder tasks versus trying to make somebody Iron Man. Like if you ever watch the movies, that's really hard, really hard to do. That level of actuation and complexity. So you'll start to see things that are very task specific, that solve real problems, and then it'll kind of expand the aperture from there. So where we are on the, I like throwing this chart up. So as a timeline. So I don't know if everyone remembers the Gordon Gecko cell phone on the left. I think my first cell phone was like that black one right there in the middle. But where we are, if you put the exoskeletons on a cell phone timeline, I think we're about here, right? So we're past car phones, right? We're unplugged. We are mobile. We've gotten past the bleaks, impractical devices, but we're not full mainstream, right? You're still in niche markets, you're still in healthcare, you're still in construction. We're not broad-based consumer applications yet, but it's coming. With the advances that we have with, like I said, the cell phones, the sensor technology, the computing power, that's really helpful. I think the biggest thing we need to work on is actuation efficiency. That tends to be a really hard problem. And the better that gets, the more capable these devices will become. So with that, that's all I have.
So I think we're all going to sit up here and start taking questions shortly, but before that, I think I would like to congratulate these gentlemen not only for great presentations, but for terrific work.
Okay, so for those of you that would like to ask questions, there's a microphone here and one at the other corner of the stage. So please come up, use the microphones. and you can address your questions to each of our presenters.
Try again. All right. So I noticed in your presentation that this might be an application of DARPA-funded technology or military-funded technology actually trickling down, affecting the average human being. So is that really what happened here, or did DARPA's funding just sort of like not show up, and they said, yeah, this wasn't really for them, and you had to go off and figure this out on your own without any help from them?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. So, I mean, DARPA funded the internet, right, which we all use today. But if you look at DARPA, they're the VCs of technology. They invest in technology that's too high a risk for any commercial entity to invest in. So if you look at what they did, and I think they do a really good job of it, is they invest in technologies, they kind of spur innovation, and they get it to a point where commercial dollars will start to take over and get it through what we call the valley of death. So there's like the early high-risk technology sector, which DARPA will fund. Once there starts to become a commercial interest, they will stop funding it and wait for the commercial market to pick it up. But that's exactly what we did. So it works. That model works.
You'll notice that early BCI research was funded by DARPA as well. I think a lot of people come and they say, well, whoa, DARPA, wait, they're trying to use this to go kill people. But they fund a lot of things to try to help people as well, I think.
That's right.
I've got a question about the lady who had the brain infection.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any chance that people who can't carry a tune in a bucket have the same brain injury, or it was never developed?
Move your abilities over to the better parts of the brain.
It's a good question. People ask that a lot in music cognition. So a lot of people say, I can't carry a tune. I have no musical ability. And the truth is, most people do have more musical ability. A lot of it is a confidence and training issue, but there are people who are born with true amusia who truly can't. And in theory, we should be able to improve anyone using training. And this is a way to, much like with her, use a different pathway, a different brain circuitry to try to get you to produce music. So theoretically, yes, you should be able to improve people who are less able, let's just put it that way, musically.
So you can do that with music. Can you do it with seeing or other deficits too? Can you actually retrain parts of the brain to pick up where another part isn't working?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And that's a lot of what brain-computer interfaces in general are trying to accomplish.
So how would that work? I mean, how would you find another part of the brain that was fully functional and train the person to reshift priorities, or how?
That's one of the strategies, is to use the natural plasticity of the brain to use it to generate a new circuit, sort of take a short circuit, if you will. And come up with, and obviously the older you get, the less plastic the brain is. But adults have a huge amount of plasticity. In fact, for brain-computer interfaces that are intracranial, we're placing electrodes in areas that hopefully will be useful for movement or whatever you're trying to accomplish. But some interesting effects that are seen. Chet Moritz, who works here at the University of Washington as well, has found that he can use the plasticity of the brain to use areas that are, say, language areas suddenly can be retrained into controlling a robot arm and can be used for movement, even in adults. So we have a huge amount of plasticity, and we're learning more and more that even adults have the ability to retrain the brain to do new tasks using parts of the brain that previously were not thought to be used for that function.
So I recall as a kid watching shows like Disney in Space and so on, where you have these space suits which have robot arms attached. And then you have the deep sea diving suits and remote operating vehicles and suits and so on. Were these the first precursors to augmentation, do you think? Or were there industrial steam-powered suits before that even?
Yeah, I think the early exoskeletons, those early deep sea diving suits were probably the hardest thing to wrap around somebody, or even some of the early astronaut suits. If you looked at some of the challenges they faced there, now obviously they weren't powered,
Right.
but just trying to solve some of the human-machine interface problems and wrapping something around somebody, it's not, there's not a lot of extra space to put stuff around a human. If you look at like a competing humanoid robot that's going to have the same capabilities of a human, they use all the space that where we are, right? And so trying to put that exoskeleton around the person in a way that doesn't encumber any range of motion or limitations is a tough challenge.
Any other questions out there? Yes, sir.
Hi. I was wondering. So like the topics about brain-computer interface today. You mainly mentioned about how to read the brain. I was wondering if there would be like the other way. Is there any are there any researches or like methods that can say like let the get input signals to the brain, such as like say a prosthetic hand. Like if you touch a microphone, you can actually feel it like a real hand. Are there any like research dedicated to that? Are there any methods to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can stimulate as well as record. So we're mostly recording, but we can stimulate parts of the brain as well. So one way you could look at that would be you could remote control someone's brain essentially by stimulating an area for sensation to get them to feel something, or you could use the receptive end of things and allow. In fact, there's been some recent demonstrations of using a robot arm to give someone sensation who didn't previously have sensation. So you can implant electrodes in the sensory areas and then have the stimulus be, rather than your own skin, be an exoskeleton or a robotic arm. I'm not sure if I answered your question correctly.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So proprioception, if you could have an augmentation connected to your brain such that you had a larger sense of space in an operating area, then you could, in the science fiction sense, you could become the spaceship or the fighter plane or whatever, simply by having that retraining of the brain.
Hadn't thought about that.
So it's interesting, when we were doing some of our early load carriage exoskeletons and we were tuning the software for them, we would get on treadmills and we called it beating the box, right? So the whole goal of the exoskeleton was to be more metabolically efficient than a human, right, without the exoskeleton. So we would constantly put the exoskeleton on and try to make it more efficient and see how much we could reduce the metabolic cost by. And there was basically two of us that were using it, and as we were tuning the software, we were constantly updating it, and every day for months making changes. And then what happened is we finally did it, and things were feeling great for us. And then we took the exoskeleton off and we put it on new users, and it was crap. And what we had realized is over the course of those 2 months, we were adapting to the actual machine and learning how it operated. So it was this weird cycle where as soon as we put it on somebody new, it was way too powerful for them to actually adapt to. So we ended up putting in these modes so someone could actually train up to figure out how to harness all the power that the exoskeleton, because you basically have to shut down your muscles to harness all the exoskeleton muscles. And so it's this weird give and take that we just were totally not aware of while
It's
it was
like being
happening.
born, suddenly realizing you got to move this thing around, right?
Yeah. Actually, the day we knew we had accomplished it was if you've ever jumped on a trampoline and then you get off the trampoline and you try to jump and you can't jump anymore and you're like, what just changed, right? And it happens pretty fast.
Yeah.
Well, up until the software was good, you'd get out of the exoskeleton and your legs, you would unstrap it and your legs would feel light, right? You're like, thank God I'm out of this thing. And then once we finally knew the control was right, you got out of it and your legs were heavy because now you had to move them because they had figured out how to benefit from the.
It's like coming out of a
extra
low G
actuation.
environment or something.
Exactly, right.
Sir.
So I had two questions. The first one is, at some point, I don't remember how many years ago this was, maybe in the last 20 years, there was an open house at UW with a guy who demonstrated a full-body exoskeleton. And I remember he had some kind of a disability, but he was the one who invented it. Does anybody have any idea who that was? Wow. I always wonder what happened to that guy. So
He's on Mars right now, growing potatoes, so.
because it
The government come and grabbed him, I don't know.
maybe. So could you talk about the
It
technology?
went dark suddenly, you know.
Yeah, could you talk about the technologies you're using in the exoskeletons? I mean, are you doing any research with like artificial muscles? Are there gyros in there? Is it all hydraulic? Like,
Yes, is the quick answer. So we've done everything from hydraulically powered exoskeletons because the power density is so great, having to invent some of our own pumps and valves to make that work. We have our medical exoskeletons that are all electric actuation. But the reality is, typically we're trying to, we're not going to create fundamentally new technologies. We're trying to optimize the efficiency of our devices. So leveraging other people's battery technology, right? Same battery technology everyone's using. Leveraging the IMUs and the sensors that come out of the cell phone industry. Like our first big IMUs were huge. They're in a big box, right? And now it's on a chip. And so over the course of the last 10 years, like I said, the computing processing power and sensors have gotten a lot smaller, so we can leverage that. What we focus on is trying to make that actuation very efficient and the structures very lightweight and efficient.
so are there gyros in there that keep people from falling also?
No, and that's actually, it's an interesting topic. So back to my statement that humans are lazy. For our users, even if they're a complete spinal cord injury patient, they're up and the crutches, they use crutches to balance. And that's really important because that keeps them fully engaged in that process of walking. What they've seen with some of these other devices that are body weight supported treadmill type of gait training is that your brain quickly realizes that there's no danger, right? You're not going to fall, there's nothing, and it shuts down and there's no signals coming down. So having the individual be totally engaged in that process and still having that risk of falling, even though there's a therapist behind them and they're fairly stable, that's critically important in the rehabilitation.
For rehab, but what about for the industrial guy who's installing sheetrock above his head?
Right. So that you want to have them still engaged so that it's like when you ever driven a car and all of a sudden you get home and you don't remember actually getting there, right? When you kind of zone out, we don't want to have that effect while they're on the job. So you want them still engaged in that process so they're aware of what they're doing. But there may be assistance in guiding them to make the right decisions, right? Not necessarily controlling them because you have these two. It's really hard to have the exoskeleton control the human because you have these two competing control systems. So they have to work well together to get anywhere.
I think a lot
Thank you.
of what we're talking here is about feedback loops and the plasticity of the human brain to adapt to a new technology is actually, what you're talking about speaks a lot to that. You actually want people to learn their own feedback and their own feeling, and if you remove too much of that, then you won't learn the device, and you can become a lot more detached. It makes a lot of sense.
It's augmentation, not rest and relaxation. So.
Right. It'd be like having your car like that. Even though you have power steering, there's still feedback. You know you're turning the wheel. If there was no feedback in that steering wheel, it'd be really hard to drive. You wouldn't understand what was happening.
The feedback's critical, not just sending out signals, but getting signals back so you can adjust and learn.
Haptic response.
Yeah.
So you had a question, sir.
Yeah. There was that initial video that you showed where there was a huge power supply on the back of the suit, and you said it was using like 5 kilowatts. And then your exosuits had almost like no noticeable power supply. They're very, very lightweight. So I was wondering, how did you or the industry address the issue of high power consumption in your suits?
Great question. So we looked at humans and said, why is this device, so Bleaks would use 5 kilowatts, whether it was walking or just standing still, right? All these actuators were there, and if the power supply had cut out, it would collapse. And if you look at the way, no one gets tired standing still, right? You get tired if you climb a bunch of stairs because you're putting in real work. And so we try to design the structures to be energy efficient to where we're not burning a bunch of power if we're not doing any work. So by designing the joints the right way and the structure the right way, you can actually make a passive exoskeleton that can carry 200 pounds and actually use very little power, like 2 watts. And then your actuation power only goes into actually doing real work. and that makes the devices much more energy efficient to where you went from a 5 kilowatt power supply to where our Hulk exoskeleton that we made that would carry 200 pounds and you could run around in, that one would use 250 watts at 3 miles an hour while carrying 200 pounds, and then if you were standing still, it'd probably use about 10 watts. So it was very work dependent.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for all your presentation. And I have a question for Ruth. Like the construction industry, are they actively engaged in requires more equipment you innovate, or there are just a few of them tasting the water?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interest in the construction space. I think it's an industry that's ripe for change and to bring some technology to. We've tested, they've actually been using some of our devices here in Seattle. There's a lot of construction going on in Seattle. So we've been down here using some devices. But yeah, they're definitely very interested. But again, it's, you have to give them the technology in the right dosage, right? You can't take them too far because then it's too far out of their norm and it'll cause problems. So it's how do you expose them to enough technology and kind of get them on this path to adopting it is the key.
OSHA regulations must be
tough. OSHA regulations aren't that bad. It's all about safety, but there is some OSHA around equipment and how we attach to equipment and making sure we keep people safe. But at the end of the day, our fundamental goal is to keep people safe, so that helps. It's definitely less stringent than the FDA. So that's helpful. So we're used to dealing with the regulatory environment.
In a sidebar, the intracranial brain-computer interfaces now are running into some of these same problems. So the computing power is catching up to where you can get really sophisticated devices intracranially, but the limitations are now bumping up against power supply and heat. And FDA is extremely concerned, as they should be. There's heat developed, and you have heat right next to sensitive brain structures, but the power supply is really becoming the bottleneck.
Right. So efficiency.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hi. So my question kind of speaks to that, but for both of your fields, what are some of the limiting factors that are kind of limiting further development in the fields? So that's the first question. Second question, for the exo thing as a business venture, what were some of the hardships that you had to face in bringing a market to product, or product to market?
Yeah, I'll speak briefly. I started, but so with the extracranial EEG, I spoke to a lot of that already. The signal-to-noise ratio, the lack of spatial resolution, those are bumping up against. Like I said, it's kind of an asymptote. Yeah. We're still improving with artificial intelligence, with machine learning processes, but that's kind of bumping up against limitations. The intracranial EEG, the power supply is really becoming a really interesting problem that engineers are going after hard right now, and also things that are very difficult to overcome that are improving, again, problems with infection and scarring over time. Those are the sort of technical limitations. And then, regulatory-wise, FDA is obviously has to approve these devices, and they're pushing boundaries a lot of ways. And the last one I would say, which is actually really important, is sort of the ethical. There's ethical challenges to augmenting humans, taking normal humans. But can you cut someone's skull open who's normal and try to make them better? Is that ethical? So.
The $500,000 man, or the $6 million man.
$6 million.
Yes. How desperate do you have to be to have your skull cut open?
Right.
There's a lot of people who really have to make those decisions, though, and so the better the medicine comes, the easier it is to proceed with that advance.
Yeah. Right. I mean, a lot of our strategy early on was to be non-invasive, just to stay away from some of those regulatory concerns. So I'll answer your questions backwards. But dealing with the regulatory environment, starting with a new product that doesn't have an FDA category, some of those business challenges, getting out there before there's clinical studies done, because you have to make the hardware, right, and get something to do clinical trials on before you can do it. So it takes a lot of time and money. I mean, it's interesting going from a grant funded, and we were funded by DARPA. We had NSF funding. We did um, uh, other funding resources, DoD, but you work on that, and that gets you to a prototype, right? A pretty good prototype. But the amount of money it takes to get from that prototype to an actual commercial product is like 10x. And so you have to find commercial investors, people that are going to believe in the story. And being in the hardware business, right, it's really hard. It takes a long time. It's not like another web app. And so some of those challenges were always there, and it always takes longer. It always takes more money to develop the product. And then being so new, where you're having to create a lot of your own technologies or, modify it for your specific use, is time and money intensive. So those are some of the challenges. And going back, I already forgot the first question. Oh, nope, forgot it.
Limitation. Factors that are limiting.
Limiting. Oh, right. So for us, it's the, some of the technologies that are limiting. Obviously, it's really hard to actuate every capability of a human. So if you look at our rehab devices today, they do a really good job of standing up and walking in a straight line. You can still turn with them, but humans are extremely capable. And so making a device for someone that has a spinal cord injury to use in everyday life, like you think about what you do during the course of a day, get in and out of a car, you wake up, all the different maneuvers you do, walking forward, backward, sidestep. So how can you make a device do that and still be cost effective, small, lightweight, and all those things? So that's really the challenge, is balancing the feature set with the capabilities and trying to figure out what makes the most sense. So if we had, invisible actuation, I mean, none of our users, whether it's on the medical side or the industrial side, if you asked how light would be light enough, they would say nothing, right? And how small or how transparent could you make it? I mean, the end state would be zero, but we obviously have to put something there. So the challenge with materials and actuation, and every time you add an actuator, it adds complexity and cost. So that's really the challenge, is trying to actuate the right things.
Thank you so much.
So one of the interesting visual approximations of what you're doing was not so much in City of Lost Children, although I do love that steampunk technology, but Brainstorm, which had the first model of the brains picking up visual and psychological and passing it to someone else, had cooling fluid coming off of it and all that stuff. And then when they got the super chip, the superconducting, room temperature superconductor, suddenly they just had your cap. So how much can we look forward to changes in brain cap technology to keep up with what you're doing?
I think in terms of regular surface EEG, not much. I mean, you never say never. But things like magnetic encephalography, so MEG, was a big leap forward in technology that requires super-cooled magnets as well, and expensive, bulky, non-portable. But seeing that becoming, seeing that becoming more portable might be a real clear pathway towards other means of measurement to drive brain-computer interfaces. So MEG uses the principle of magnetic fields and electric fields being in parallel. You can measure an electrical change, and you can see a change in the magnetic field. The spatial resolution is much better. Temporal resolution is just as good, and it's still non-invasive. So that would be one direction. There are other imaging modalities that can be pushed forward. But I see that much more than advancing conventional surface electrode EEG.
Without having to strip all the metal out of your pockets and everything, and take your wedding ring
There's
off.
that too.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask about the encephalophone. It looks like it's pretty complicated to learn how to use that. And so at first, when Greg was talking about it, I thought, well, this could be a great way for someone who doesn't know how to play the piano like me to just kind of do a melody. But now I'm wondering whether this really would have application for normal people. Is this something that could become part of the orchestra? And also whether in the course of your work with it, you've come up with some things that you couldn't do with any other instrument, anything that could be unique to encephalophone music. Thanks.
That's a good question. So, our initial experiments were with completely naive people who had varying ranges of musical training, and they did pretty well with no training. So I think, yes, we could train people. It's not incredibly complicated. It takes some focus, but anyone can learn it, really. It's just like picking up a new instrument of any other kind. You have to go through a learning curve. So I think we can get an average normal person to do that. I think we've shown that. In terms of anything it's made me able to do that I couldn't do with a regular instrument, I mean, I'm a trumpet player. I'm not very good, so I invented an instrument that I could play. But not much. I mean, I would say, you know, the big thing is not moving, physically not moving. But I don't. It's not as good as a conventional instrument, for sure.
Yes, sir.
So my question is a little bit for all three of you. Your two technologies are addressing the body and the mind respectively. Do you think that there's a future in which they'll be able to meet in the middle somewhere? And if so, what does that mean for the definition of being a human in that said future?
Well, first I'd say we're both kind of working on both. In a way, his exoskeleton device is just harnessing the natural plasticity of the brain and augmenting the mind as well as the body, even though it's mostly physical on the outside. I am hoping to take purely cognitive processes and turn them eventually into actual movement body. So I think we're already kind of there. But a nice way you could bridge them would be, I mean, it becomes obvious, but you hook up a brain-computer interface to an exoskeleton. Right now, we're at 80% with surface EEG. It'd probably be a bad idea to have someone tripping and falling 20% of the time. It could be quite dangerous. But that would be, you know, if you had an implanted EEG and you hooked it up to his exoskeleton, suddenly you have a paralyzed person who's walking around.
Right. Well, I mean, today we use, so for high-level paraplegics or even quadriplegics, as long as they still have arm functions, we can sense intent, right? And we get basically a clear signal of intent through their body positioning versus going through the straight EMG. But if you look at some of the work DARPA's doing right now with the intracranial EEG sensors and controlling robotic arms, I mean, they are doing that, where you know, you can, with good accuracy, move a robotic arm with full volition.
Paul, how much time do we have left?
Thank you for asking. Unfortunately,
Time for one more question, I hope?
Yeah, sadly, we need to be completely out of this building at 9 o'clock.
I think we can have one quick question, and then we can start clearing out.
If we could, please.
Okay, cool.
That'd be great.
Yes, sir.
Not sure how quick this is. What is it that both of you, or all of you in your fields and companies are excited that might be a problem that, or a breakthrough that happens, that you know, like there's a research group working on this in this field, or maybe you're working on it, that in the next 3 years is going to totally change or increase what you're able to do in your company or your research field? Like, what are the breakthroughs you're excited about? And then cast that breakthrough 20 years out. What is it that you see your role 20 years out in this field, knowing that that may have actually happened in a few years?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I would say new imaging modalities like MEG being applied to brain-computer interfaces. And again, it's maybe a boring answer, but improving power supplies on intracranial EEGs, allowing them to be implanted and much more complex, would allow people to have very portable, sophisticated brain-computer interfaces. That's what I would see as things that we're kind of on the cusp of. Now, what would my role be? I don't know. playing music in the same.
Yeah, on our side, you know, it's battery technology. You know, the more energy density we can get out of that, the more functionality we can put into some of these devices. And then, again, the actuator technology, making compact actuation that's very strong and power dense and small, right, is going to be important for us. But with that, like I said, you can start imagining expanding these things to, you know, one of the things we're really excited about, we call it silver tech. Right, so as the entire population ages, how do we keep people mobile, keep people walking, keep people healthy? It doesn't take much power to do that. Can we make devices that are transparent enough where you can get people to wear them every day and keep walking around with their grandkids and stay mobile? Because we think that really is the key to health.
How about artificial muscles and ATP or sugar solutions? So your exoskeleton runs on a Coke.
On lard. Actually, lard. We've talked about this. If we can run on straight lard, it's the most.
Straight lard. That's what I run on sometimes. So.
Yeah, we just pipe it in. And benefit of both worlds. Yeah.
I wanted to thank Tom and Russ, and I want to thank all of you for coming to this meeting, and it's been a very instructive evening. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We're not going to drop the mics, though.